thank you for joining us for this conversation. Who is Jody? Where are you from? And how did you come to this position with the presbytery?
Gosh, well, I'm not from anywhere. My father was in the military, so I grew up all over the place. But if I had to call someplace home, it would be northwestern Pennsylvania because my grandparents lived there. And I am a cradle Presbyterian because that's where I started with my grandfather in his tiny little church in northwestern Pennsylvania. And every time we moved, which was every 1 to 2 years, it always included a visit to them. We are delighted to be here. And after arriving, 6 months later, COVID hit. So I had the blessing of being in a church. At the time, I was at Clemens Presbyterian as an associate. And so that was my home for a few years. So my title is Designated Presbyter for Transformational Ministry. The focus of my position is to be with those churches who do not have installed ministries. So in this presbytery, we have 70 churches out of 130 who do not have installed ministries. So that's close to 55%. And of those, 19 of those are African American churches, and 15 of those do not have installed ministries, and that's closer to 80%. Wow. So it's pretty sobering. Wow. I might make your jaw drop just a little more in that one of the things that I've noticed as I've been working with some of these churches is they don't interface with presbytery. They don't have a relationship. And so when I go back and I looked, for example, in July at our presbytery meeting, 83% of those churches did not attend presbytery. And then in this last September meeting, 92% did not attend. Each one of these 70 churches, they're wandering in their own little wilderness because they're not connected to presbytery. And that's one of the things I share with them when I go in is that you aren't alone. The issues that you're going through right now, every other church in this presbytery is going through those on different levels, but all of them are. You know, COVID forced us to transform. Not all of us were capable of doing that, and not all of us did. So it involves some degree of technology, some degree of expense. And we still have churches out there that don't Zoom. We have churches that will never live stream or record sermons. So that's another barrier we need to look to get through.
One thing that I do want to point out is that we happen to be sitting in the Sanctuary of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Winston-Salem, which has recently decided to close its doors as a Presbyterian congregation. And I thought it was fitting for us to sit here in this place where those difficult decisions have been going on and are still going on as to what do we do now and what do we do with the property and so forth. Those are terribly difficult decisions, and I'm wondering how many other congregations that you've been in touch with since you started this position that are in that same situation or nearing it?
Gosh, every single one of them can. Almost all of them, because I'm working with some sessions who have been the same session for the last 10 years because their congregation is so small. You can imagine that the energy level is pretty low. So the ability to think about not only getting through COVID, but how do we minister on the other side of that? One of the things I want to do, first of all, is to physically be present with a session or a congregation. So first I will try to worship with them or meet with their session and explain to them that I have some resources that I would like to present to them. And the resources cover these areas we just talked about: financial, property, and then a spiritual assessment. And these are not report cards. Nobody else sees them. They're not going back to presbytery. These are just to help us understand what our reality is. And everybody's reality is a bit different, but we have to be honest about what we're looking at. Not, gee, I think we're in bad shape, but we're a breath away from a catastrophic property issue that could bankrupt the church. We have to be honest with that.
How are people responding to that or reacting to it, to the information that they're getting?
So that's a great question, and it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
So I would say if you were talking to a session and you say things like, okay, these numbers reflect a declining revenue, declining attendance, declining membership, increased property costs, they would say, tell us something we don't know. We already know that. The two things that really are surprising to me, and I'd want to make sure that these are understood not as criticisms, but as observations, is what I would call the lack of leadership and sustained leadership. And that's not that people aren't trained to be leaders. It's just that when you are tiny communities and you don't have installed ministry, having consistency, having consistent leadership, having consistent messages from your pulpit, it's much harder to accomplish that.
Oh, yeah.
So leadership is one issue. The other issue that I find consistently, and this is another, maybe I would say indirect result, is lack of understanding of who we are as Presbyterians. A lot of folks now are so focused on survival that they've sort of missed the focus about who we are as Presbyterians, as God's children, how we're called to be, who we're called to be. You limit the Holy Spirit when you say you need young children, because the Holy Spirit works in so many different ways.
Right.
And if you want to engage children and young families because you envision growth down the line, that's a wonderful thing to have, but it takes time.
Right.
And these churches that we're talking about, that's the other message, unfortunately, I'm the one to bear, is that time is not our friend.
What is the most exciting and hopeful part of what you're doing?
Thank you so much for asking that, because I've just shared all these things that are heavy things. But at the end, the only thing I would want people to walk away from is there is so much hope. I see it in every one of these little churches. And I always am grateful for every session I sit down with that we are the people called to this place in this time to do these amazing things because we believe in a God of abundance. We don't have a God of scarcity. We have a God of abundance and hope. We are resurrection people. We are Easter people, and it's being laid out before us. So that is the hope that I see in every community, and I hope each community sees in itself.